Hi, welcome back to the channel. In today's episode, I want to talk to you about the severe damage that's being caused to the global economy by the ongoing war in Iran. We've now passed the 1 month mark of this conflict, something that many analysts originally thought would only last for a few days. And the reality is that the incremental damage is now starting to undermine the outlook for the global economy for the rest of 2026. And not only is this war continuing, it's actually expanding and escalating. But before we get into the details on all of that, could I ask anybody that hasn't subscribed yet to please hit that subscribe button? It only takes you a second, and it really does help me with the algorithm and puts a smile on my face. Now let's start about the most worrying development, escalation. Over the last few days, we've seen the Houthis in Yemen becoming actively involved in this conflict, firing missiles towards Israel. And this is significant because of geography. The Houthis are positioned right next to the Bab al-Mandab Strait, one of the most important shipping routes in the world. We've talked a lot about the Strait of Hormuz, but this one is also important because around 10% of global trade passes through this narrow channel every single day. And we've already seen disruption here in the past. If this route becomes blocked, which is a real possibility now that the Houthis are involved, even only partially, then we're looking at a major shock to global trade. At the same time, we've also seen Hezbollah in Lebanon stepping up their involvement in this conflict. They're also firing missiles towards Israel, and obviously Israel is retaliating. So what we have now effectively is Iran, Yemen through the Houthis, and Lebanon through Hezbollah aligned against Israel and the United States. So we've got 5 different countries that are actively involved in this conflict. So it's no longer contained to just Iran and Israel. This is now a multi-country regional war, and the risks are increasing rather than decreasing. Now let's move on to talk about energy, because this is where the economic impact is being felt most immediately. Before the war started, oil prices were sitting at around $70 per barrel. They were actually up from $60 at the start of 2026 as concerns about the potential for something to happen in Iran rose. At the time of making this video, oil prices are currently sitting at $107 per barrel. That's an increase of 45% in 1 month. That is an absolutely huge move in a short period of time. We've also seen natural gas prices surging sharply, particularly in Europe and Asia. They've almost doubled, driven by fear over supply disruption and infrastructure damage. And the issue here is that Europe and a lot of other countries have actually moved away from the old-fashioned generation of electricity using coal to natural gas because it was cleaner and more environmentally friendly. But those countries are now dependent on buying in that gas. They lost the supply of Russian gas as a result of the war in Ukraine, and so now they're having to import gas from places like the Middle East. And all of this is going to result in a huge increase in the cost of electricity in all of those nations. And the reason why gas prices have been rising so rapidly is because Iran sits right next to the Strait of Hormuz, which handles around 20% of global oil and gas supplies every single day. So any disruption to that stretch of water, even temporarily, has an immediate impact on global prices. And now with rising tensions around the Bab al-Mandab Strait next to Yemen, we've effectively got 2 major global energy choke points under threat at the same time. Now let's move on to talk about the financial markets, because this is where we're starting to see real-time reactions. At the start of the war, the markets were fairly ambivalent. They basically weren't really moving that much because everybody was hoping that this would go away quickly. But unfortunately, the markets have now realized that this isn't going to happen. We've got this conflict ongoing and nobody knows when it's going to end. And the S&P 500, which are the 500 largest companies in the US, is down by around 7% since the war started. And the Nasdaq, which is more technology driven, is down by around 8%, and Dow Jones is also down by around 7%. Now, to put that into context, the total value of the US stock markets is around $70 trillion. So a decline of 7 to 8% equates to around $5 trillion that's been wiped out on the value of those companies in the United States alone in 1 month. And when we look at the situation globally, The FTSE 100 in London is down by around 8%, the DAX in Germany is down by around 10%, and the Nikkei in Japan is down around 6%. So when you combine all of those markets together, we're looking at somewhere between $6 and $8 trillion wiped off global stock markets in 1 month as a direct result of this war. Now that is an enormous destruction of wealth. Now, alongside the market losses, we also need to consider the direct financial cost of the war itself. In the first few days, estimates suggested that the United States had spent around $5 billion in a few days. That was on missiles, deployments, all of those sort of things. Since then, the scale of the operations has increased significantly. We've seen sustained airstrikes, missile defense systems being deployed, and naval forces operating in the region. Based on current estimates, it's likely that the USA alone has now spent somewhere in the region of $30 billion within the first month. And that number is rising every single day. When you add in Israel's military expenditure, regional operations, and equipment losses, the total cost across all parties is likely in excess of $50 billion in 1 month. That is amazing. It's just a huge cost. And then we have the human cost, which is obviously far more important than the financials. At this stage, estimates suggest that several thousand people have been killed, many more have been injured, and hundreds of thousands of people have been displaced from their homes as a result of the fighting. And those numbers are continuing to rise every single day. So this is not just an economic crisis, this is a growing humanitarian crisis. And when you combine the financial cost, the human cost, we're now talking about trillions of dollars destroyed and thousands of lives lost in the first month of this conflict, that leads directly to the physical damage. It's being reported that at least 40 energy infrastructure sites have been hit so far during the conflict, and some of the damage is severe. One of the most important impacts is that Qatar has reportedly lost around 17% of its LNG capacity for the next 5 years, not just for the next 5 weeks or 5 months, 5 years. That is a huge number. And because Europe is now so heavily dependent on LNG, gas is critical for electricity generation, and many industrial sectors rely upon stable gas supplies. So it's not just a short-term issue that's going to go away as soon as there's a ceasefire. This is a multi-year structural problem that we've caused. And from there, we move into global trade. We're now seeing increasing disruption to shipping and supply chains. Routes are being rerouted, insurance costs are rising, and transit times are increasing. And critically, we're now seeing export restrictions being introduced. Multiple countries have started to limit exports of ammonium nitrate and other fertilizer-related products. And this feeds directly into global food production. Farmers rely heavily on these inputs to maintain crop yields. You basically need to add fertilizer to maximize the yield that you get from all of your growing. So any disruption here is likely to result in lower agricultural output, higher food prices, and increased inflation globally. We're also now seeing shortages emerging in key industrial materials, including, as I mentioned in a recent video, helium. Now, helium isn't just needed for balloons for parties, it's critical for semiconductor manufacturing, artificial intelligence chip production, everybody's more dependent on AI than before, and medical equipment. So this is now becoming a broader industrial supply shock, not just an energy issue. Now, politically, there's a very clear disconnect. We've heard Donald Trump repeatedly saying that the war is almost over, that Iran has been significantly weakened, and that a deal is going to be agreed soon. But the reality on the ground suggests otherwise. There are no clear signs of a deal being agreed. And rather than weakening the regime, this conflict appears to be strengthening domestic support within Iran. Everybody is pulling together against the common enemy of Israel and the USA. So the idea that this would lead to internal collapse or revolution within Iran at this stage looks pretty unlikely. That was basically what Donald Trump said at the start of the war, that the people of Iran should rise up and take the opportunity to overthrow the regime. So when you put all of this together, we now have rising energy prices, markets losing trillions of dollars, supply chains under pressure, food production at risk, and industrial shortages starting to emerge. All of this feeds directly into higher inflation, higher interest rates, and lower economic growth, and potentially a major global slowdown in 2026. So the overall summary of today's video is this. After 1 month of war, it's turning into a complete disaster for the global economy. There are no positives whatsoever coming out of this situation. People are dying, infrastructure is being destroyed, supply chains are breaking down, and prices are rising. And crucially, the longer this continues, the worse the economic damage is going to be. So I'll keep you posted on any further news and developments as and when they happen. Hopefully you found today's video useful, informative, and most importantly, thought-provoking. I'm trying to get you to think outside the box, to think about why what's going on in Iran will have an impact on your daily life, not just today, but potentially for the rest of this year and even beyond that. If you've liked what I've said, or maybe you didn't quite like it, but you thought it was interesting, then please give me a thumbs up. Please subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. Don't forget, I'm currently running with my competition where you can win my property or a cash alternative prize. It's another way of helping fund the channel. A bit of fun. Scan the QR code on the screen now or click the link in the description below if you'd like to get involved. I've got some interesting deals on the go right now. Thank you to everyone that's supporting me in other ways. If you've bought me a coffee or sent me a YouTube super thanks or signed up as a patron or a member, thank you so much for that support. It really does help to keep me motivated and making as many videos as I can. And here's something to put a smile on your face.